So welcome. I am Rebecca Vandevoort from Academic Outreach and Innovation. For those of you who don't know me, and this series of faculty-led workshops is sponsored by AOI, the Provost's Office, and the Teaching Academy. And today we have with us, I think, a number of folks from the Intensive American Language Center. I can never remember exactly what it's called. But I want to introduce Dr. Kate Hellmann, who worked with us and put this presentation together, and let her introduce her panel. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Dr. Vandevoort. So first of all, I want to say thank you. We are so happy to be here today talking about this particular topic. And we have a wonderful group of panelists here, so I want to start by introducing them. On our left here, we have Emily Harmon, and Emily has been faculty at the Language Center for some time now. Dr. Eman Elturki is our Curriculum and Materials Coordinator. And we also have three faculty here, Lynn Harmon, Justyna Hjeltness, and Margaret Mount. And we're going to be discussing today teaching international students. And we're going to try to make this as relevant as we can to everything that you do in the various disciplines that you do it in. So we're going to start by giving you just a very brief overview of our Language Center. And these are the things that we're going to hit on today. So we've got quite a lot to do in just a little bit of time. So first, I want to start by talking a little bit about the Intensive American Language Center and the reason why we are on campus. So the Language Center, among many things, provides English language training. Our main purpose in existence is to prepare students adequately to enter degree-seeking undergraduate and graduate programs. And so the thrust of our mission is to help students successfully navigate or bridge that transition into degree-seeking programs. So who are we? We are one of the top 5 academic ESL programs in the United States. We are actually one of the largest and longest, most well-established programs. A little bit more about what we do. As I said earlier, we are an academic ESL program. We have 5 levels for undergraduates or 6 levels for graduate students. Our curriculum is at the lower levels structured to lay a foundation for students to have functional and communicative English. And then in our upper levels, which are 4 through 6, we follow a content-based English for academic purposes model. And so everything that we do in the classroom is really structured to support and help students gain the appropriate language proficiency and prepare to navigate the university environment well. So, being that we are an intensive program, one of the things that often surprises people is how quickly, students can move through our program. On average, a student spends just 4 months studying at the Intensive American Language Center and then moving on into an undergraduate or graduate degree program. So this is actually quite quick. The Language Center has 5 8-week sessions per year, and so it is quite intensive. We put the intense in intensive, we always say with a smile. So each student is actually in class for 21 hours per week. And in addition to that, we encourage them to participate in a variety of social and cultural events so that they can experience all of the best that Washington State and the Palouse have to offer. So that's a little bit about our program. To help us meet our mission, we do have advisors that do undergraduate and graduate advising to help students matriculate into degree programs. We also offer the free International Teaching Assistant exams, which evaluate potential graduate students' ability to speak English and be understood in the classroom. And so we provide departments with a rating. We have a language support program for students that have already matriculated. So if a student has already passed the TOEFL, the test of English as a foreign language, or the IELTS, the International English Language Testing System, and they are still unprepared or struggling, they can come down to the Language Center and take a course or two that will support their academic success. In addition to that, we have various research projects and collaborations that we work on, and we offer about 8 to 10 customized programs per year for a variety of different audiences. Finally, the last point that I want to make to provide you with a bit of context about our program is that we are specially accredited. In 2008, President Obama and his administration rolled out a federal law requiring all ESL programs in the United States to become accredited. Actually, the Intensive American Language Center has been accredited for about 20 years, and we are currently going through our re-accreditation, which will be another 10 years of accreditation that we'll be wrapping up this May. So we're pretty excited about that. It is a gold standard in the field and enables us to consistently and constantly improve, evolve, and do better on behalf of the students, the demographics, and the university. We are also part of the Office of International Programs, which is something that not everyone knows. In addition to the Language Center, we have an international undergraduate admissions area, Global Learning, which does our education abroad. We also have an international center, which provides events, services, programming, and support to students as well. So I wanted to quickly make that point. Now, since I've been talking quite a bit, I want to give you all an opportunity to talk a little bit about your experiences teaching and working with international students. So I'm hoping that you'll just spend a very quick 3 to 5 minutes discussing in small groups these 3 questions. So we're hoping to hear from you and a little bit about your expertise. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to think about these questions, and then we'll come back together, briefly discuss, and then we'll move on. Okay? All right, I'm gonna gently cut you off because I'm hoping that we'll do just a little bit of sharing before we move on. So I want to start with this first question, and if we could just have a few shows of hands. About how many international students do you currently have in your classes? Yes?
Well, in a typical graduate class of maybe on average 20 students, over half of them are typically international.
Mm-hmm. And this is pretty typical of a public R1. Anybody else?
I have 1.
Okay. Does anyone teach undergraduate courses? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Leslie and I work with the freshman seminar program, and those are our small classes of 20, but typically we have a couple of international students in most of our sections.
I'm a PhD student, so I've been a TA for large UCOR classes, and since they are UCOR classes, we tend to have, and I'm from communication, so I tend to have a lot of international students. And I have always been given, so if I'm a TA, I've always been given either A to D, so I have many Arab students, and if I'm towards the end from XYZ, then I would have more of Chinese and Korean students. So I've always had a lot of international students in my TA sections.
Thank you so much. And just so you know, WSU is currently about 7% international. Many of our peers are between 18 and 20%. So this is sort of an interesting opportunity to provide comparison. Do you adapt your teaching style? And if you do, what do you do to adapt to the international demographics in your classrooms? And it's okay if you don't. We'll talk about it.
So I'm an international student myself, so it has been a challenge initially for me. And Kate has been very helpful. She was in international center at that time, and I think I used to go every day. But one of the things that I faced with my students, in spite of spending 4 months, 6 months in ILC, they finish all their courses in ILC, but when they join a freshman class, some of the content-based courses, so I teach a content-based courses and also a public speaking course, I've seen them being very defensive about the mistakes that they make. They always would say, "Oh, I'm an international student, just starting my undergrad degree in English. So why can you not be a little more considerate for me?" So this has been a challenge trying to explain to them, because I don't know if there is any university policy to adapt our teaching support to international students.
Well, and I think that's why we're here today, to have an open discussion about, you know, what are some of the best practices, or what are things that you're doing that you can share, and we'll offer some perspectives on that today. I want to try to wrap this up. Do you have major issues or alternatively positive aspects of your teaching that you would like to share with the group before we move a bit more into our content? Okay. Well, fantastic. I think we're all eager to learn how to do a little bit more. So I'm going to hand it off to Justyna, who's going to talk a little bit more about what you just started to bring up, some of these challenges that students might face. Oh, I apologize. It's Eman.
Okay, so one of the challenges that international students might face is the difference in the pedagogical culture and academic system. So they come from academic systems, most international students who come from, for example, North Africa, some Middle Eastern countries, some Asian countries, they come from a teacher-centered learning environment where the teacher is the authority, has full authority in the classroom. And students are passive, usually or typically, students are passive learners in such environments. So they listen to the teacher and they just memorize the information, and they rely on the knowledge that they get from the teacher as well as the textbook. So in such classrooms, students are expected to be completely silent. And actually, literally, when the teacher gets into the classroom or enters the classroom, students must stand to show respect to the teacher. And they can't talk unless if they're given permission to talk. So there is no collaboration, there is no group work or discussion. Students are totally independent. They rely on the textbook and whatever the teacher says. So there's a lot of focus on memorization. Students are expected to memorize the material and then to reproduce the knowledge that they learn from the material and the teacher in high-stake examinations. And that's why they have different citation practices, so they might not be familiar with citation practices that students learn here. So they're not expected to paraphrase or interpret the materials or use their own words. So they're expected to memorize and put everything word for word. And that's why academic integrity is viewed differently. And when they come here, it's a challenge for them to learn how to paraphrase and cite or learn different citation styles. So how can you help them with this? So maybe it's better, or it's recommended, that you learn a little bit about the students' backgrounds, the culture that they come from. And for example, Asian students, the education system in Asian countries, in Middle Eastern countries, versus, for example, Eastern European countries. So yeah, that you can get some knowledge or some background information about their practices or the academic practices on those countries. Another thing is to go over the course syllabus thoroughly. Course syllabi do not exist in some countries, so it's good to explain to students that this is like a contract between the teacher and the student, and you go over the policies, the expectations, the logistics of your class. Another thing is, this is a big challenge, is learning the different academic citation styles about academic integrity. So it's a good idea to share some examples and to explain that plagiarism is a serious offense here in the US, and maybe you can share with them some websites for whatever the citation style you're following, or maybe send them to the writing center or to us so that we can help them with those issues. Who's next? Thank you. Okay, Lynn is going to talk about classroom participation. Thank you. Welcome. Put my glasses on first. Okay, so limited or no class participation, and you brought up this point. Sometimes international students don't feel as free to speak up, speak out, and participate. And one thing that can really help is just to give a few minutes. Give a few minutes to help them collect thoughts, or even write down some things, or to speak in pairs before speaking in front of the whole group. I think that's, yes, give students a few minutes. That helps quite a bit. Also, just generally breaking students into small groups, and groups no bigger than 6, to help them feel comfortable in talking in front of a group. And I found this in class. Even for me, 3 seems to be some sort of magic number. That if the group size is larger than 3, a lot of times students are just silent. It's much easier to get them to talk if they're just in pairs or small groups. And research bears this out, that 6 seems to be a size limit. Also, it's best to have heterogeneous groups. So if the instructor can engineer the groups and have them reflect or mirror the diversity of the class as a whole. So putting all international students in a group is not really a good idea. Even though they might say they're more comfortable, research shows that they do much better if they're in a mixed group. Use online platforms. So Blackboard, I know a lot of you use Blackboard, so there are options to do student forums or chat groups. Also having them interact by responding to blogs or other things can help some students. It certainly doesn't help all, but some feel more comfortable in using that online digital way to communicate with others. And I'd like to say that don't overgeneralize that students come to us with a variety of different educational backgrounds. We have a lot of Chinese students right now who went to high school in the United States. And so they're very well versed in American education system, and they maneuver very well in the classroom. And there are just personality differences also. Some students are just more comfortable in participating than others. So my suggestion is not to overgeneralize. And I will give this on to Justyna.
All right, thank you, Lynn. So when we have international, oh yeah, that's right, this is not my microphone. When we have international students in our classroom, there are several important issues and classroom management strategies that we may implement to help our students have a more positive classroom experience. And most of the pedagogical suggestions I will mention here could be related to both international and domestic students. However, it's important to remember that domestic students' problems are not always shared by international students. In fact, international students face problems of different nature. They have to do, as you mentioned, more with their cultural background, educational background, or linguistic proficiency. And during my part, I will focus on the linguistic proficiency part, and I will tell you how to help your students become more proficient note takers and listeners in your class, because that's where it all starts, right? With listening. So first, what can we do? We can provide a clear outline for our students. And once we provide the outline is going to allow students in following the lecture, and it will also guide them through the note-taking process. And it's important to remember that once we provide the outline, we still need to define new or unfamiliar concepts from the very beginning. We need to ask for clarification. And it's also a good idea, once we provide the handout, that we stick to it. Oftentimes, we may provide too many anecdotes, we may use idiomatic expressions or colloquialisms that may not go so well with international students. And let me give you an example. 4 years ago, I was an international student myself, and I was sitting in my first American college class. I was already nervous to begin with, right? Because it is a nerve-wracking experience. And the professor said, let's cut to the chase. I'm like looking around, let's cut what? What are we cutting? I know, now that I think back, it's like, whoa, how did I not know this phrase? Even though I was quite proficient. Well, from the very beginning, I became very stressed and very confused, and it really did impact my ability to learn for the first half an hour of that class. I was constantly processing that phrase in my head, trying to make sense of it. So I would strongly suggest that making those small changes may have really large impact on your students. Next, we need to allow time for note-taking. And how can we do that? We can do that by adjusting our pace while lecturing and checking for comprehension. And here I would like to say that an average American college student has a vocabulary of approximately 20,000 words that took them, 18 to 20 years to acquire. It can be very challenging for international students to bridge this gap. Learning a new concept while taking notes and listening in a foreign language all at the same time is extremely difficult. And as you mentioned, one mistaken concept or word could result in misunderstanding of the whole idea. So it's important that we stop and check for comprehension, not only at the beginning of the lecture, also during the lecture. That's the key. Also, we need to adjust our pace. And what I like to do in my class is I like to use this little trick using longer transitions. So rather than saying then, next, and as we speak, I try to say now that we have seen this, let's turn to this. It helps students, there are some of my students sitting in the back, I think it helps them notice that I'm moving from one idea onto another idea, from one concept to another concept. Also, taking some time after, when you check for comprehension, it's a good idea to give your students 5 seconds, okay? So when you say, do you have any questions? And then you quickly move on. Well, international students may not have time to form their question in their head. So the 8-second rule is my rule. I give my students 8 seconds. Sometimes it's a little awkward because they all look at me. But I really do think it gives them the chance to actually come up with their question, if they have any. So that's something that I learned really helps me. And my students, hopefully. And we also need to illustrate key points using multimodal support. What that means is that as we teach, we need to write down keywords, key concepts on the board. Oftentimes the students hear the word, but they don't know how to spell it, and as a result, they don't have complete notes. Also using visuals, pictures, videos is great. And I believe that most of you probably already implement PowerPoints or Prezi during your lectures. But what I would strongly recommend is posting your slides prior to the lecture so that international students can actually access your slides, look up some words that they may not know, some concepts. I found that very helpful myself as an international student. And if you're not convinced, I know that some of you may think that, once students get their slides, they'll not come to class because they'll have their content. I don't think that's necessarily the case. Oftentimes, international students are very intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. They are either paying a lot of money to study in the US, or maybe they're here on scholarship, or it's maybe been their dream to come and study in America. That was my case. So I think they're usually very motivated. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And also, as I mentioned, processing in a second language takes a lot longer than processing in your first language, and learning new concepts takes longer. So if it's your student's first semester or second semester in the US, really giving them access to your notes before class is extremely helpful. And the last thing I would like to mention is you need to, it may be a good idea to make your, right, hedging, very important. It's important to make your instruction multimodal and tailor it to all learning styles. And the more ways of teaching we can implement, the more likely we are to reach our students. And I think this one could really be applied to both international and domestic students. And now I think Emily will continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I steal the clicker as well, ma'am. Thank you. So the part that I'm going to focus on kind of plays a lot off of what Justyna was talking about. When I was a new teacher, one of the biggest criticisms I got when I stood up in front of my ESL classes and was observed by a supervisor was that I used far too many idiomatic expressions. I used far too much slang. I referenced too much pop culture. Things that to me seems like they made perfect sense. What do you mean you don't understand? Cut to the chase. But once you're sitting in front of a room of international students and you get that blank stare, that confused look, you kind of rewind what you just said, and you go, wow, yeah, they have no idea who that is or what that meant. And like Justyna said, I think this also can cross between international and domestic students. So listening is a difficult skill enough as it is, and then we make it more confusing by saying things like, cut to the chase, kick the bucket, Elvis has left the building. And students are like, who's Elvis? Where's he going? Why is he leaving? Class isn't over. So there's confusion that can go in with that. Pop culture slang and sarcasm is another big one. It can often be taken literally. The biggest clue for me on this is to be responsive to student expressions. If you're giving a lecture, you're looking out, students are giving you that quizzical face, looking confused, try and review what you just said. I know it's been very difficult for me to eliminate those kinds of idiomatic expressions from my lexicon. I still use them in class. What I've tried to do instead is, rather than get rid of them entirely, turn them into teaching moments. And I don't mean spend 30 minutes explaining an English phrase to your class. See if there's a way that you could simply paraphrase it, synonyms that you could come up with. Oftentimes I've done that with students in some of my upper level writing classes. I think one we did most recently was, I said something about, I don't want your papers to sound like a broken record. And I was like, oh, you have no idea what I mean. And this is where it can also be a problem for domestic students as well. This was not only a cultural issue that we were struggling through, but also a generational one. Tried to explain what a record was, drew it on the board, and everyone goes, oh, a CD. And I was like, no, how are we going to get this across to you? But by simply paraphrasing and saying, what I really mean is that I don't want you to repeat the same thing over and over again. Light bulb. So they may not understand that phrase if they hear it again, but at least they've had some exposure to it, some explanation of what it means. And it does go both ways. Like I said, it can be cultural and generational. And I think part of the problem for some international students, like Justyna said, it's really hard for them to process in a second language. It does take a lot longer. So you say something about kick the bucket. They're doing a literal translation to their native language. Okay, kick in my language is, okay, got this. All right, bucket. By the time they finish trying to figure out that that doesn't make sense in the context, now they need more time to process what it could possibly mean based on the rest of the lecture or whatever you were speaking about. Where am I going with this one? So again, it's not necessary to eliminate this from your lectures or from your content, but just keep in mind that these are things that will often go over students' heads. If you can take 30 seconds to give a short explanation, a paraphrase, repeat it in other words. Try not to use unnecessary jargon and then offer synonyms if you see confusion on students' face. And I think this is kind of the biggest one, is just the awareness, kind of being aware of the vocabulary that you're using, being aware of students' reactions. If you have a lot of blank stares, think about the words that you're using. Think about how you could change the language or re-explain for them. The idea of repeating or paraphrasing also benefits students who are having a hard time processing it. If they don't understand it the first time, say it one more time. Give them another minute, like Justyna and Lynn were saying. Give them a little bit of time to try and process and understand these things. And I'm handing over to Margaret.
How does this thing work? Just push that one. Click. Okay. Hello. I'm just going to put everything up because it's easier for me. I think that's it. Okay. So welcome. I have the last but not the least part. There we have another
what do you call them, expression that not everybody will understand maybe. And so my part is really about texts and academic texts, and when you give students readings, I think it's important to tell them how to read it. Help guide them. It's a lot about genre, and in academia there's a lot of different kinds of genres of writing, and students are not necessarily sure how to approach the text because they come from a different culture. Eman kind of hinted on this, that since they come from different academic environments, the texts that they have access to may be a little bit different, and they may not be familiar with all of the different genres that we have here in our academic system. So kind of helping them figure out how to approach it, just that's the main question to kind of think of. How can I help this person know how to approach the text? Because they will try. And sometimes they'll try so hard that they'll spend 4 hours on an assignment that I told them to spend 20 minutes on because I didn't explain it well enough, right? Or and that happened to me just yesterday. You really have to kind of tell them how to do it, help them. They'll do it once they know, but you have to help them know how to do it the way you want them to do. And so one of the things that's really helpful is to give them some reading guides. Like before you start, as I said, tell them how they should be reading it. What vocab is important so that they're not in there kind of looking all over the place and picking up keywords that they think are important but aren't necessarily important. So you could provide vocabulary lists or work with them to know what kinds of vocabulary words are the most important. So they're looking those up as opposed to looking up every single word. And that's something that I do a lot in my classes. And also kind of guiding them to know how, to take on the previous knowledge that they already had, so kind of in pre-reading strategies. What do you already know, maybe personally about the subject, or what other reading have we done in this class, so that they can kind of start situating the next text and knowing how they're supposed to approach that next text. And then afterwards, having some comprehension questions, but not just comprehension, having some way for them to kind of maybe sort through what are the main ideas, what are the supporting ideas, what is important in the text and what is not important, either through some kind of comprehension study guide that you give them ahead of time or something that you review with them afterwards. Because sometimes it can be tough in another language to know what is important and what is not. So just keeping that idea in your head all the time will really help them, because they want to learn and they will put the effort in. They just need a little guidance as to how to do it properly. Not because they're stupid, but because they come from another culture and a different academic culture. And so that was pretty much, let's see. The second one is how to approach an assignment. So a lot of times they'll just try. As I said, they spent 4 hours the other day on an assignment that I didn't want them to spend 4 hours on. The more clarity you can give them, the better. It might spell out your instructions as much as possible. And hopefully once you do it once or twice, they'll get the hint and you won't have to spell them out if they're the same kind of instruction. But really try to spell out the instructions so that they will be able to do the job that they want to do. And that also means giving them examples. As I said, this is all about genre. Every assignment is a different genre. We have to teach them how to do each kind of an assignment. We can't assume that they know. So here's an example of a synthesis essay. Here's an example of a book review. Give them samples and examples, and they will be able to do some analysis on the samples to figure out, okay, this is how I do this kind of assignment, and then they will do their best job. Yes. So that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I think Kate's going to take it from there.
Thank you. All right. Well, I first want to thank all of you for coming, and I especially want to thank our wonderful faculty for helping put this together. They really deserve all of the credit. Before we get into questions, I do want to say explicitly that the Intensive American Language Center is here as a resource for everyone at the university, whether it be questions about working with international students and how to help them, or questions about, how do I help deconstruct an academic text for a student? But having said that, I do want to open it up for questions or comments at this time.
Hi, we have a participant who is online and I'm going to try to, she has a lot. I'm going to try to convey her question. She teaches international management at the Carson College of Business. And she has quite a few international students. And she tries to create projects, as you've been talking about, where they're mixed, where international students are mixed with native speakers. And she has students from Korea, Germany, China, a lot of different places. One of the things she wanted to know about is she says it appears that in some countries it's more culturally acceptable to have cheating. And she wanted your perspective on that. I asked her if maybe that originated from some form of confusion about what the expectations are here, but she said she just would like to hear your perspective.
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. You know, there are faculty perceptions and expectations, there are student perceptions and expectations, and I think you heard here today that students certainly come to a U.S. university with what I like to think of as sort of almost an invisible backpack full of expectations and understandings that we really have to do our best to deconstruct. So what we may perceive as cheating, a student may or may not understand as cheating. And I know we touched a little bit on academic integrity today. I think that's something that really bears repeating. We talked a lot about the syllabus being a contract between the teacher and a student. Sometimes it's hard when students first come to the United States. They may not fully understand, what is plagiarism? How do I cite sources? What are the tools that I need to use to do all of this? And so my propensity would be to say, rather than saying that certain cultures are more or less prone to cheating, that it brings up an opportunity to talk about academic integrity in the classroom and also across cultures. I see that with everything. Even health insurance, can bring about so many questions. We have students that come from a single payer system, and how do they understand, or wrap their heads around what we do here? And so I think it's an opportunity, like I said, to have a good dialogue with students. The thing that I would caution is to say we have to carefully frame these conversations so that students feel heard, understood, and supported. I think that there's a lot of different rhetoric and terms that are thrown around, and we really just want to be careful about, what words we use. So I know that's a bit of perhaps an ambiguous answer, but I'm happy to add a bit more if that's helpful too.
I'm just curious, of the students that go through the center, how many of them go on to WSU, or are they going elsewhere?
That's a really great question. Those statistics have been changing because our focus in marketing and recruitment at the Language Center has changed. And so right now, and for about the last year, our marketing and recruitment area is international undergraduate admissions. And so we really are targeting degree-seeking students. And in fact, we have a faculty member who spends almost half her time helping students apply to undergraduate programs. And although we do have graduate-bound students, the bulk of our population currently is degree-seeking undergraduate students. And my understanding is that it's about 80%. So we do have some IALC-only students, and typically those are spouses of graduate students and scholars, but by and large, it's degree-seeking students that we are serving. And we do have a very good retention rate. So yes, one of the things that we always tell people, and I think this is so true of Pullman, it's a high-touch university. And so having said that, and a lot of what we're talking about today, it has a small town feel and high accessibility. Students really love that. It's a safe place to be, and so they do end up staying here. Our retention rate is quite good.
So it's not exactly a question, but more like a comment. So when we make the syllabus for both undergrad and grad courses, there are few paragraphs which are compulsorily put. And I'm in the graduate syllabus committee as well. So there are few. So can we put a statement on students needing language services or writing service? I'm not trying to demean the language capabilities, but I have never seen all these resources in any of the syllabus. So if we can put a compulsory statement in both undergrad and graduate syllabus about language services and tutoring services, I think that would be good. And even when it's written that the instructors are willing to meet the students in their office hours, it sounds like very authoritative and kind of literally pretty intimidating for the students, that only when they have a problem with grades or something like that they can go. So for general language requirements, and also you mentioned about the after they leave the center you provide services for follow-ups and all. If that can be put in the syllabus, that would be great, I guess.
I think it's a wonderful dialogue to have, and I think that's part of why we're so happy to be here today, to be educating the university writ large about the Intensive American Language Center and the different things that we can offer to you. As far as mandating something on a syllabus, I don't know that I have the authority to do that, but I think it's definitely a point worth further discussing.
I'd like to say a little something about having students come to offices. And something that I found is very effective, and I don't always sort of remember to do it, but inviting students. If you invite them or even make the appointment, the initial appointment, please come to my office. So they at least see where your office is. It's not so scary. It's they're more comfortable. Oh, okay, people do this. They go to their professors' offices, just sort of understanding that it's part of the culture of American university, and inviting them to come rather than just saying, oh, my office is open, but actually making an appointment with them and just checking in, I think can be helpful.
As TAs, we are supposed to list our office hours but not leave it as on appointment. I think if we leave it as on appointment, they would make it an effort to make an appointment and come, rather than just leaving it as office hours, which sounds more like a mandate and not an invitation.
Right.
As teaching assistants, we are mandated to keep office hours and not leave it open as that's some of the problems.
Well, and I think that's a really good point too. I think one of the things that, if I could, real quickly stress, because I know we're running out of time, but anytime that you have an opportunity to reach out and get to know one of your students and can have a conversation about what's behind what's going on with them in the classroom, that can be such a value added, and it can be a value added to all of the American students in the classroom as well. One of the things that we talk a lot about in international programs is the fact that only 3% of students study abroad. And so for the 97% of students that are here on campus, the international students are really bringing the world to our classrooms. And so it provides a great opportunity to start to get into some of these conversations, to create what we call global learners. How can we have conversations about, for example, cheating, or how can we have conversations about even visiting a faculty member's office? What is that like across cultures? I think those are some of the things that if we can start to think about that can help us start to think about some of these critical issues that we aren't going to be able to solve with an us or them attitude, but as a we are different and strong together, how do we think about that, and how do we think about these things together type of attitude.
Our online participant has one more question. Do you offer services for online students?
That is a really interesting question. We have provided English language training and services at a distance in the past. I would be happy to pass along my contact information to have continued conversation about that. And actually I have business cards here as well, but that is something that we do have the capacity to do. Having said that, I will offer the caveat that F1 students must have face-to-face instruction, and if you don't speak the language of visa, F1 students are the vast majority of your degree-seeking undergraduate and graduate population. We do also have our global campus, which has a lot of international students as well, and all of them are taking educational programs at a distance. So yes, that's an excellent point, Dr. Vandervoort. Thank you.
So one of the slides, I think when you were talking about what IALC is and what services it offers, said that you provided support for students once they had matriculated in. But is that only for students who have been through IALC's programs, or if a student, for instance, a TOEFL score was high enough that the student was able to matriculate directly into the university, but was still having challenges, are they still, is IALC still available for them as a resource to use?
Absolutely, and actually that's a really great question. We also have folks that will come in and they might be American citizens, but for whatever personal reason, they might have lived abroad, gone to an international high school, and they might be facing some of these same things. We do have U.S. citizens that will come in and do our program, but the IALC is a service to all of the university, regardless of what their visa status is or if they're a resident of the United States. And so that language support program that I was talking about, one of the things that we do for students is once in a while they will come in, and as you alluded to, they've passed the TOEFL or the IELTS, but really they're unprepared for the speed of discourse, for the rigor of academic reading and writing. And they might need a support course. They might need to take, an 8-week, 6-hour-a-week course in addition to their degree-seeking courses that they're taking. And that is an opportunity that's open to anyone. We do once in a while also see what we call Generation 1.5 or heritage learners that are American citizens but will come in and take a course in an area where they really need some English language support. So actually our tuition for an 8-week session is $2,625, and it can be broken apart into part-time courses. So although that may sound like a lot, we always talk about how we are a best value. So taking a 3-credit class, I believe, is about $350, or a 3-hour-a-week class. So if budgeted, can be affordable.
But their regular tuition would not, their regular...
No. No, it's a special tuition and fee structure.
I think we're out of time, but I really want to thank all the folks from the ILAC being here today and speaking with us. This has been I found it really interesting. So thanks. And I'm sure Kate's cards are here if you have questions and want to have more conversation with her.